Okay, I wish you good afternoon to all of you, since it is already 16:31 or 4:31 p.m. and we are sometimes told to be one of the lands of Germany. I better start. I was told by Pastor Dr. Sikaviri that I will have 90 minutes today. So it's going to be a little bit longer time to go through all the material, and then there will be some time at the end of the paper. I try to go in between the aisles to get to know who is from where, etc. So we do have some Americans, we do have some Europeans. My name is Martin Damašek. I am the junior pastor at St. Michael Lutheran Church here in Prague, the Czech Republic. Obviously, as you can hear, I'm local, and I serve along with Pastor Koster from the LCMS, who serves as a missionary here in the Czech Republic. So that's as for my introduction. I will just ask you to raise your hand, because I didn't talk to everybody, who is from North America. Okay, 3 of you only. Okay.
Well, I'm halfway. I've been a missionary in Russia for 25 years. So
okay, cool. Europeans, raise your hand. Okay, cool. Okay. Since we have a lot of Europeans, it might be easier for you. So, I was assigned the topic after being approached by somebody to talk about the Czechs, about the Czech atheism, and about Czech church history. So, one of the first things that I hear when I come to the US is, well, where are you from? Okay, the Czech Republic. What do you do? Okay, such and such. And why are you guys so atheistic? Is it because of communism? I mean, everybody can Google, and everybody can Google the statistics, and everybody can Google that not even 40% of the Czechs are believers or Christians. I'm not going into the confessional breakdown of the numbers. And very often in North America, the question is, well, okay, you are one of the most atheistic places in the world. Why is it so? Is it because of communism? Well, the picture is a little bit more complicated sociologically. It has deeper reasons. There are different deeper layers of the sociological phenomenon of atheism. I dare to say that if you live in Prague and go to have a beer with a Czech, you would rarely encounter scientific atheists. That's what the communists were using as a term. You would very rarely encounter somebody who would have the courage and the knowledge and the will to argue for non-existency of God out of theology, philosophy, or science. That would be very rare. The atheism of the Czechs is, I would say, very unreflected, and there is, in Czech sociology, there even is a special term for that. Czechs are not atheists, they belong in somethingism. They believe in something. It doesn't necessarily have to be Eastern religions. The most common answer that you would receive from a Czech would be, well, I believe in something. I believe in some force, or I believe in some principle. And then you would not dig deeper, because the person would not be able to give you any background of their philosophical persuasion. That would be kind of the common encounter with a Czech. And the other common encounter would be that he or she, if you try to speak the gospel, if you try to preach, if you try to evangelize the person, and you try it the same way like you do it in America or in some parts of Europe, you would be very unsuccessful. You don't invite the person to your home like in the United States. You don't invite the person to the church. Because Czechs, the Czech atheism or the Czech superstition is rather a distrust to any form of organized religion and any institutionalized form of religion. And then again, in North America, very often I would be asked, okay, Pastor, why? Is it because of communism? And the answer is yes, but that's only probably 30% of the story. History does matter, and history is much longer than communism and the Berlin Wall. So what I'm going to do with you, I'm going to fly in next 30 or 35 minutes, I'm going to fly through 1,000 years of history, and I will try to identify three problems or three experiences that there are in Czech history that kind of formed the psyche and formed the historical experience that translates into the institutional distrust of the Czechs. Grzegorz.
If I may, short question before that. The below 40% believers rate, is it about self-identification?
Yes, it is. There is no state church in the Czech Republic compared to Denmark, for example. And when the Czech Statistical Office does, what do you call it in the US? When the office does the census every 10 years, it would be a long questionnaire of about 10 pages, and one of the paragraphs would be on religion, and you would self-identify as a believer, a Christian, and then you have an option to fill in the blank what kind of church. So officially, the Roman Church is the largest, and then all the other churches follow. So it is a self-identification, and the number is dropping. That's not necessarily because of philosophical or theological persuasion of the population, but because there is no any objective key how to divide the people. There is no registration. There is no church tax as well compared to Germany. So this is self-identification, and let's be frank, to us Czechs, we are lazy people when it comes to bureaucracy. So we don't want to fill in that part of the paper because we are bothered when it comes to our mailboxes. And again, that will have something to do with the historical experience. Okay, any other question for the beginning? So that's the research question. Why are we that way? What historical experiences influence that, and to what behavior, to what kind of psyche or persuasion does the historical experience translate into? Okay, you are in Prague, the capital city of the Czech Republic, and the capital city of the Kingdom of Bohemia. It used to be the Kingdom of Bohemia. The eastern part of the country is Moravia, and the northeast is Silesia. Silesia is divided between the Czech Republic and Poland, the smaller part being in the Czech Republic. The Czech lands, meaning Bohemia, Moravia, Silesia, Christianity arrived to the Czech lands from Germany. Probably already from the 7th century or the 6th century from the western direction, from Germany, from the cloisters in Bavaria. So remember, first influence from the west, from what today is Germany. There was no Germany, by the way, yet. There was Bavaria, the Kingdom of Bavaria. But then, to kind of geopolitically offset that influence from the Holy Roman Empire, the ruler in Moravia, the Great Moravia, which was in Moravia and what today is Slovakia as well, invited missionaries from the east, from Thessaloniki, from Greece, from the east or southeast. And in order to preach to the people, those two brothers, Cyril and Methodius, or well, in English maybe Cyril and Methodius, they invented special script, special alphabet, Cyrillic alphabet. Does it ring the bell? The Cyrillic alphabet. The Russians use it right now. When you look up the Russian alphabet, or when you look up the over 1,000 years old Cyrillic alphabet, it is very similar to the Greek alphabet. Those of you who can read Greek, when you know Greek, you can walk the streets of Odessa and read the signs. So they arrived from Thessaloniki, from Greece, and they brought translation of scripture into this language, and they brought the scripture as well. It was a geopolitical attempt of the rule of Great Moravia to offset the influence of Western Christianity from Bavaria, from the Holy Roman Empire. That's, again, we got another influence from the east. You're in Central Europe, but you have the Western and the Eastern influence, very important for the future and very important for Czech psyche and very important for also politics until today. Then we move, so that happened the 5th of July, 863. Then in 925 or 935, we don't know because it's over 1,000 years ago, a Duke Václav, in Czech Václav, he's the guy on the horse at the Wenceslav Square, and in the United States you have a song, The Good King Wenceslav. That's Saint Wenceslav. He was a very pious leader. He was the one who started building the church, that direction, at the Prague Castle, and he did not want to have a war with Germany, or what today is Germany. So he agreed to the emperor to pay a fee, certain number of cows and certain number of lamb, etc. And in order for the emperor not to invade. Well, that did not fly with his brother. His name was Boleslav. And he invited his brother Václav to neighboring town of Boleslav. And he invited him for a dinner. And the next day morning, when Saint Wenceslav went for a mass in the morning, he got assassinated. He was opening the door of the church when he was stabbed from behind by the serfs of his brother Boleslav. Well, he became the martyr for supporting the church and for dying while opening the door to the church where he searched for a sanctuary to be saved at. So you have the first saint in Bohemia that died kind of for a political reason from the West, right? So you got an interesting blend of geopolitical influences and cultural influences. What kind of alphabet are we using? Anybody shout at me. Grzegorz knows. What kind of alphabet are we using? Shout at me. Latin, yes. So which geopolitical influence won at the end? East or West? West. The West, yes. The West won, and probably the peak of that was Charles IV. When you walk the streets of the city of Prague and you walk the Charles Bridge and see most of the Gothic churches and buildings that are in the city, the The guy, Charles IV, is responsible for that. Charles IV was the king of Bohemia, and he was the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire was kind of a confederation of states in medieval Europe that stretched all the way from the Northern Sea and the Baltic Sea, all the way to Rome, and east, the most expanse was all the way to Minsk at some time. So it was really a big part of Europe. It was a confederation, and it was what the Western Christendom was. Charles IV he held both chairs. He was the king of Bohemia and he was the emperor. And as emperor, he not only built the beautiful things that we have, but he did two important things. In 1348, he established university. Charles University in Prague, or the University in Prague. That was the first university north of Alps and east of basically Western Germany. All the other universities did come much later. That's important for what I will be talking about in about 2 minutes. And also, he issued new imperial, you would call it constitution today. It was called the Golden Bull of Sicily. Anna, who is a Czech, she suffered that education, so she knows. The Golden Bull of Sicily was a new constitution for the empire that instituted that the emperor was elected by electors. There was 6 or 7 of them from the left-hand kingdom and the right-hand kingdom. And the king of Bohemia was one of the electors. The king of Bohemia became one of the electors, one of the votes that elected the emperor of Western Christendom. The city of Prague became the capital city of the empire, and it was the 3rd largest city in Western world. After, can you guess the first one?
Rome?
Nope.
Paris?
No.
Granada?
It was Constantinople. I mean, Europe, in between Europe and Asia. And then I think second was London or so, for some time. It had about 60,000 people. Just imagine how Europe looked like. About 50 or 60,000 people. So, and on top of that, the Kingdom of Bohemia was not only, I think, the biggest state in the empire, but it was one of the richest states in the empire. It produced like 30% of GDP of the empire. It was rich. That's why you see all those beautiful buildings in the city. Well, after Charles IV died, 1378, I think, we have Magister Jan Hus, or John Huss, being the rector or the president of the university. Raise your hand who knows the name John Huss. Cool, good. Okay, when you go to the Old Town Square, you would see the statue. He was a reformer, scholar, and a theologian. He held masters from the Charles University in Prague, masters in theology, and he preached at the Bethlehem Chapel, not too far from St. Michael, where you will have your service. And John Huss spoke up. He was a pupil of John Wycliffe. Where was John Wycliffe from?
Britain.
England, yes. Okay, very often we think, okay, Europe back then was the Dark Age. Wrong. That's kind of an Enlightenment idea. They traveled, guys. If you received bachelor's degree from a European university, you would travel all over the continent on foot, on a horse, or on a mule, or on a ship. They were, well, they didn't have emails, but they were corresponding with each other. They didn't have English, but all of them knew Latin. So Prague University would be inviting lecturers from England, and John Huss was reading Wycliffe. And John Huss stood up and he criticized the church. Not only the schism in papacy, but if you came to the Bethlehem Chapel, you would hear pretty fiery sermons. He demanded the clergy, he demanded a number of things. He demanded that the sacrament of the Lord would be served sub utraque specie, in Latin, under the both kinds, the body of the Lord and the blood of the Lord. That was a revolutionary thing at that time. He demanded free preaching of the Word of God by all pastors and all deacons. And then he demanded such revolutionary things as the pastors should not hold any property. No bank account, well, there were no banks yet, but no owning land or house or etc. The church should return to the ideal paradigm of the early church of the New Testament. A little theological detour. Europe at that time was a battleground between two paradigms, the nominalists and the realists. The realists believe that all values and philosophical notions really do exist. So if I say that there is such a thing as love, it's not only a word, but love does exist somewhere, somehow. Beauty, justice, and so on. Those things do exist, and they translate into reality somehow. And then the nominalists who claim that those are just names. Well, you judge for yourself who won the battle. However, John Huss was a realist. He did believe, when he wrote a book, De Ecclesia, on the church, he demanded the church to return to the ideal of the New Testament church. To the ideal. The ideal is something real, and it is possible not to reform, but to renew the church. So the church should be like in the old times. All the clergy people should not have any property and they should live in poverty. Well, that did not fly very well with the church, of course. And John Huss, as the rector of the university, came to a conflict with the church, and he was invited by the church or by the council to the city of Constance at the bottom lake between Germany and Switzerland today. Well, Magister John Huss thought that he is invited to carry on a theological debate, disputation. In a medieval university, you would send out letters to all the continent, and usually in the summer, the university would host a debate for which you would prepare your position and your arguments and list of books. And it would be in a room bigger than this, and the sides would be divided by a wooden, by a wooden bar, so they don't attack each other physically, literally. And they would debate for a month. And then, after that, the university would issue annals. They would issue printed or written summary of the debate, and they would send it all over the continent. So kind of a conference. And poor Huss thought that he's being invited to the council in Constance to debate, to defend his books. Well, it was not a debate. It was a legal trial. So as soon as he ended up in Constance, he was put to jail. You can go to that place until today. There is a museum. And he was not given a chance to debate. He was asked to recant. And he refused. And he said kind of the famous sentence that is written on the statue, that you should seek truth and stay in truth and let everybody to have truth. And he was sentenced to be burned as for his teaching because he did not recant. And before they burned him, he was supposed to say the famous sentence for which at the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod headquarters in St. Louis, Missouri, there have swans on the pond. He said, well, you can burn a goose, because the word has means goose, but there will come a beautiful swan like one day. Well, they executed him, and the Bohemian and Moravian estates, all the noblemen, sent a letter to the council and to the emperor, and they affixed their seals, and they protested. Well, too bad, that was not success. So, when in Prague, go to the beautiful church of St. Mary of the Snow. In August 1419, Jan Želivský, who was a priest, one of the subway stations is named after him. He was a pastor. He preached a sermon, and then they went with the body of the Lord in a procession, and they went to the new town hall of the new town of Prague. It is the building at Charles Square. And they demanded to meet the councillors, or the councilman, and they demanded those citizens of Prague who were receiving the sacrament sub utraque specie, under the both kinds, and they were imprisoned, they had been imprisoned, they demanded the release of the prisoners. Well, the councilman refused, so the Praguers threw them out of the window. It is called the first Prague defenestration. Defenestration, to throw out of the window. We did it 2 more times. So that's what defenestration is. That started 20 years of so-called Hussite wars. Raise your hand who knows that there were crusades. Yes. You probably do know that the crusades were to the Holy Land, right? Some of you may know that there were crusades to the Baltics, to northern Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Raise your hand who knew that there were 5 crusades to the Kingdom of Bohemia. Who knows? 2 hands, 2 or 3 hands. Yes, 5 crusades against the Bohemians. One of them was at Vítkov, which is the hill above Prague with the huge statue. And most of the crusades were defeated. And it was probably the biggest rebellion, the biggest religious rebellion in Europe of that time. They did not crush the Bohemians, but the Bohemians started not agreeing, or they started disagreeing among themselves. So at the end, as every war, they sat down for diplomatic talks. And they reached an international agreement that was sealed in the city of Basilea in Switzerland. And the international treaty is called compacts, as a compact international treaty. And there were 4 rights and privileges that the Bohemians and the Moravians enjoyed under the international treaty. The Bohemians and the Moravians were the only one in Western Christendom who could receive the Lord's Supper sub utraque specie, under the both kinds. That was quite a revolutionary thing. Second, all mortal sins were supposed to be punished equally, no matter what social standing or status. If you were a peasant or a nobleman, a knight or duke or whoever, the mortal sins were supposed to be punished equally. That was a revolutionary thing. Read the Bill of Rights or the US Constitution. Not a new idea. The third one, free preaching by priests and deacons. In Bohemia, anybody who received the education and was and in Moravia, who received the education and was ordained, could freely preach the gospel. Also the deacons. So you could go to a town and preach. That was quite a revolutionary thing. And the fourth, that's kind of provoking until today, no ownership of property by clergy. That was very revolutionary. The last one, I will elaborate on that one for a little bit. During the Hussite Wars, the most radical part of the Hussites were the ones who established the town of Tábor. You may recognize the word. Tábor is a place in the Old Testament. They settled in southern Bohemia, about 100 kilometers south from Prague, and they established a new town. They were awaiting the second coming of the Lord. And they established a new town, and they tried to live as the old church of the New Testament. They would gather in the city walls, they would gather in the square, and they had a big vessel in the middle of the square. And everybody who came to Tábor submitted all their belongings to the city. Christian, true communism. It was a true monastic Christian communism. But I wish Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez does study history a little bit. It lasted not even a year. It didn't work at the end anyways. But there was such an attempt. I'm mentioning it because later on, that example was kind of an inspiration for all the other trials in all the other attempts in Western history. Okay, so that's Huss and Hussite movement. By the way, before Huss was invited to Constance, when he was in the city of Prague, the Pope declared interdict over the city of Prague. That meant that as long as Huss was in the city of Prague, there were no services, no weddings, no funerals, no Lord's Supper, nothing. Just imagine you are a Praguer during those days. Your grandchildren will remember all of that. It was a generational experience. Well, John Huss left the city, and he went to southern Bohemia. So the Pope declared anathema against Huss. That meant that any Christian could not or should have not extend any kind of help to Huss. No food, no glass of drink, and Huss could have been killed without any punishment of the perpetrator. Again, everybody in southern Bohemia knew who John Huss is, and he was being protected by the local nobility. That historical memory lived with the Bohemians for 200 years. Okay, I will move swiftly to the 17th century, where after Luther, I will move to 1618. when the Protestant Bohemian estates threw the imperial governors out of the window of the Prague castle. We did it again. Whoops, we did it again for the third time. The Praguers met in what today is the House of Representatives. They went to the Prague castle, they got hold of the governors, and they threw them out of the window. Well, this time, the governors landed on their butts in straw and poop under the castle. And they ran to Vienna. And it started another war, 1618, 30 Years' War. But then, the Bohemian estates saw themselves, when they started the revolution, when they started the kind of the revolt, they saw themselves as the estate democracy. They wanted to establish an estate democracy. That the estates, the noble people, would be electing the king. And they wanted to develop the Czech lands according to the example of the United Netherlands. United Netherlands was a republic at that time. However, the Allies, the English and the Dutch and some of the Germans, did not come to help, and the estates were not organized well, and the towns and the cities had already been depleted, and Moravia refused to join the revolt, and the ordinary people did not want to fight. Well, why? The ordinary people remembered how they ended up under the Crusades after Huss. It's 200 years apart, but when the Bohemian estates started the revolt, the people still remembered that in every family somebody was killed by the Crusaders. So 200 years ago, in 1618, when the Bohemian estates started the revolt against the Habsburgs, the ordinary people did not want to join because they were like, well, our great-grandfathers suffered greatly and such number of people got killed. So they did not want to join the revolt. So on a foggy morning in November 1620, the Bohemian estates lost to the imperial army at the Battle of the White Mountain, just very nearby Prague. Well, actually in Prague now. And the results were devastating and long-lasting. In 1627 for Bohemia and in 1628 for Moravia, new land constitutions were issued by Emperor Ferdinand II without the consent of the Diets, meaning the parliament. Because of the estates lost the civil war. The effects were far-reaching. Absolutism, Roman Catholicism established as the only legal religion. Everyone had either to change his or her confession or leave the country and leave all property behind. So if you were Lutheran after the Battle of the White Mountain and you lived in Prague, well, you better pack your suitcase and go, or change to Roman Catholicism. And people went and left their land and their houses. They did not have any other choice. And foreign nobility was invited from the west and allotted land, your land. You had to leave. You left your land, your house, and foreign nobility from Italy or Germany received your property. Guess what kind of psychological effect it did have for the population for next centuries. About 500,000 Protestants emigrated. 500,000. Probably today 20% of Chicago would emigrate. And they never returned. Lutherans withdrew into basements, into secret forest churches in Silesia. You can visit them, actually. and into secret networks. And people were investigated and interrogated about the confession of their family members, and learned to distrust the government and each other. Because if you had a Lutheran in your family and they came to your house, they would be interrogating you. Well, if you wanted to protect your family members, you better lie to the government, and you learn to distrust your extended family because you never know whether somebody would betray you. Again, and that happened everywhere in Bohemia and Moravia. Again, think how deep and long-lasting psychological and sociological effect it had on the population. That lasted for about 160 years. In 1781, Emperor Joseph II issued a toleration decree. So 3 confessions were allowed or tolerated in the Habsburg Empire: Lutheranism, or Calvinism, and Orthodoxy, because Habsburgs had some lands in the east. Lutherans could not only meet for private services, they could also build toleration worship houses, not churches. 1781, United States Declaration of Independence is 1776. Churches without towers and away from the main streets. You could meet, but you could not have a tower and you could not have the entrance of your building to the main street. However, all the property that had been confiscated after the Battle of the White Mountain was not returned. Only 19,000 Lutherans were left in the Czech lands at this time. 500,000 emigrated, 19,000 left. Okay, a little bit more optimistic. Full freedom of confession came in 1867 with the December Constitution, and when the World War I ended with the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Habsburgs were dethroned in the Czech lands in October 1918, the Czechoslovak Republic was established by the Czech and Slovak elite, following the example of the American Republic and the US Constitution. Actually, the Czechoslovak Constitution did copy the US Constitution to some extent as for the freedom of religion. But there was a short-lived dream. The Czechoslovak Republic lasted only 20 years. The Munich Accord of 1938 ended the short-lived dream, and the 1948 communist coup brought a generation-long red regime of the comrades. It brought communism. So now, about 1 page on communism, and then we will discuss. I call it the red regime. In line with Hegel and Marx and the Communist Manifesto, propagated progress. When you say the word progress, it's not a good word for us, at least not even for my generation. That manifested itself in Czechoslovakia with almost 5,000 people dying in prisons, 170,000 people forced into exile. My family member swam across the Danube River and ended up in Las Vegas. Over 200,000 arrested and 300,000 emigrated to the West by 1989. Also, collectivization of the farming and the means of production. That's why our food production is so destroyed until today. Confiscation of private property. Our family property was confiscated too. It was given back in 1991. Strict control of churches, internment of nuns and monks, and other beautiful things. Okay, the Communist Manifesto. Communist Manifesto divides people into two classes and sees the whole history as a class struggle of the proletariat against the bourgeois. And the proletariat eventually being conscious of its necessary role in the historical progress and emancipation, finally executing a revolution that will establish classless and stateless society in which everything will belong to everybody. And my dad used to say, and to nobody. Stealing will be normal. Corruption will be normal because nothing belongs to anybody. Two antagonistic classes. The communists divided families and children into the working class and into all other socio-economic or historical and cultural groups whose members were the enemies of the society and the state. The working class held all power and was to lead and govern as it was inscribed in the Constitution of Czechoslovakia. We don't tear our statues. Go to Hračanská subway station on the Green Line, and you would see on the wall of the subway station this quote from the Constitution of Czechoslovakia. It says, quote, "All power in the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic belongs to the working people," end of quote. Those words are still in the wall of the subway station until today. Until today, together with fists ready to fight the class enemy, we didn't remove that piece of art, at least not yet. No matter if you were a child and did not choose your social class, it was your guilt of being of the wrong social origin, and you were treated accordingly. And I can speak with authority because I'm old enough and my parents are old enough too. So, no access to high school if you were a Christian, or university, no good job, no teaching job, or job with the government, no access to a copy machine. Of course, you could be dangerous with a copy machine. No travel to the West, and you were reminded of your wrong social origin in the school class. Does it ring the bell? What's going on in the classes today, in the school classes? The stigmatization could go as far as your kid returning from a street play and telling you that he or she cannot play with your neighbor's kid because the parents actually tell their kids that your kid is the bourgeois or the capitalist, meaning an enemy. Do we not divide the society along those lines again? And of course, as a Christian, you and your children were on the wrong side of historical progress. You were taught at your school that religion is the opium of masses, and that your church is an obsolete institution that historical progress will do away with. Go to the small towns in the Czech Republic. Very often, the Bolsheviks did not turn churches down as in Ukraine or Russia. Not here. It was too much to the west. But they kind of fenced them with their buildings. So very often you would go to a town square, a small town square in a small town, and you would see an ugly, boxy building of a supermarket in front of a church. That was the cultural progress of the communists. This is an obsolete reality. We will fence it with the new reality, with new pictures, right? And that was going on everywhere. Okay. Last paragraph. The liberation and emancipation, we like those words, don't we, today? Read the Communist Manifesto. Send a copy to your congressman to read it. To see the shocking things that it says about a family and women. Indeed, women are to be liberated and emancipated from the bourgeois family. That is, according to the manifesto, just an institution based solely on capital and on private gain. Emancipated for what? The old communist saying goes, work the mother of progress. So emancipated from men and children to work for the society. Send Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez to Prague. I will show her the numbers. The Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, Hungary has probably one of the highest numbers of working women in the world. That's the result of communism. That's the economic emancipation. They did it, guys. They reached the paradise to a certain extent, the paradise. So no surprise that in the post-communist Europe, women were economically much more independent than in the West. This liberation was done via government-run early childhood care, kindergartens, for free, for everybody. You didn't have to pay daycare. Strictly communist curriculum at schools, and then by further control of the youth through different communist organizations like the Pioneer or the Union of the Socialist Youth. Again, the government and social pressure was intensive and ever present in the society. Everyone had to be employed. You would go to jail if you did not have a job. You would literally go to jail if you were not employed in Czechoslovakia before 1989. And when you walked in the street, you would have to carry a so-called workbook with you, where you have a seal and signature of your employer that you're working. Homeschooling was non-existent, of course. Not to capitulate to the government and social pressure and not to join the pioneer equaled to not having a work or social future and to end up on the watch list of the Secret Service. My uncle was one of them, watching my mother and us. We found out about 20 years ago. And belonging to a scout or to a semi-legal Christian youth group or listening to Western music would attract the attention of the state security services, and you could find yourself singled out in a classroom as the enemy of the working class and the state. Again, think what's going on in the West right now. In the class, historical events from your country's history, like the Hussite movement, were interpreted and taught strictly according to the official Marxist line, and very often it happened that as a child you came home, and I remember that. As a child you came home and your mother or father retold you the same historical event from a different perspective, and you were advised to keep silent and keep the truth for yourself. Actually, I would remember that. I would return from the school and I would ask my dad something and he would say, no, it was such a way, but you better keep your mouth shut in front of the teacher and don't tell anybody. Again, doesn't ring the bell. What's going on in the West today and in some parts of the West. And in the post-1968, after the Soviets came, after 1968 so-called normalization, it led to a growing mutual distrust in the society and the government. You did not trust not only the government, but your own family. because you could never be sure whether a family member would be informing the Secret Service what you're doing, and whether you're wearing jeans at home. You could be thrown out of high school for wearing jeans at home. Or going to church. There would be Secret Service guy in front of a church, and you can forget about any college education. And it led to a withdrawal from the public into the private lives of people and into safe spaces of private flats and cottages. That's why the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Poles, the Hungarians, and the Eastern Germans, when you go to Wittenberg, you would see cottages in the countryside. Why? Because the last 20 years of communism, the people, I mean, you couldn't go to West if you were a Christian. You could not travel. You had to stay under the Iron Curtain. And you couldn't do much because you were the enemy of the state and of the society. So you built your little cottage and you lived your life in your family, and you lived your life in your little cottage. You withdrew into your private life. Good for family. I was born in 1981, and there is a lot of us because people were having kids. People didn't have much to do in a way. But that's where the cottage cult comes from. You would do craft. You would seek self-realization at your cottage because out there it was dangerous. Out there in the society, out there in the government, out there at school, out there in extended family, it would be dangerous because you were never sure. So we have 3 historical traumas. 5 crusades against the Bohemians, against the Hussites. Luther remembered Hus. That's why he was persuaded that he will end up like Hus. Everybody remembered. Second, the 30 Years' War and what followed, the interrogation about your faith, and third, communism. So not only communism, it is much deeper running problem in the Czech society. So then ask the Czechs, why do you distrust institutions? Why are you not open to talk religion? Well, history does matter. And the historical memory is long. In your family, you would remember things for 150 years. Okay, and at this point, I will shut up. And your faces are kind of gloomy. And I open for questions or discussion. I don't